There's something a bit funny about Adventure Time, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. When you're a kid and you watch it, it's a cartoon about a boy and his magic dog going on adventures. They fight monsters, they make friends with a candy princess, they argue about whether a sandwich counts as a sword. It's colourful and silly, and the theme song is about eating a meal. That's more or less the whole surface reading, and then you grow up a little, or you come back to it with adult eyes, and you start noticing things. There are ruined skyscrapers in the background that nobody mentions. There are moments where characters allude to a civilization that used to exist and doesn't anymore, and everyone around them just keeps walking. There's a villain whose desire to kill everything is treated with the same casual energy as the Lich wanting a cup of tea, if the Lich drank tea and didn't, want to destroy all life in the universe. Adventure Time ran for 10 seasons across 8 years, from 2010 to 2018, and in that time it built one of the more quietly remarkable fictional mythologies I've come across in animation. Not remarkable because it's the most complex, there are deeper lore systems out there, but remarkable because of how deliberately buried it all was. You had to actually pay attention. The dark stuff was always there, sitting underneath the candy-coloured surface, and the show trusted you to find it rather than pointing at it with flashing arrows. There's also a lot that was never explained, not by accident, but on purpose. Pendleton Ward, who created the show, always seemed more interested in the feeling of a mystery than the satisfaction of a resolution. Some threads got picked up, a lot of them didn't, and I think that's actually what makes the hanging threads so interesting, because most storytelling is anxious about gaps. It rushes to fill them, to close loops, to make sure the audience has all the information. And Adventure Time just didn't bother with that anxiety. Some things in its world existed without explanation, the way things in the actual world exist without explanation, and you were invited to wonder rather than expect resolution. It also helped that the show had an unusual relationship with tone. In the same episode, you'd have a gag about a character eating too much pie, and then a 2-minute sequence that was, if you were paying attention, about grief, or about identity, or about the way people we love become people we no longer recognize. The tonal whiplash was so consistent that it stopped feeling like whiplash and started feeling like the show's actual texture. Silly and sad and strange and occasionally quite dark, all at the same time, the way life tends to be. That's sort of the spirit of what we're doing tonight, or this morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Not a breakdown designed to keep you on the edge of your seat, just a long, unhurried wander through the corners of the Land of Ooo. The mysteries, the theories, the dark bits the show slipped past the censors. The parts that are genuinely unresolved, and probably always will be. If you want to subscribe before we get going, there's a button somewhere nearby for that. But if you're already drifting, that's absolutely fine too. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the show, but the beginning of the world. Here is the foundational fact of Adventure Time, the thing the whole show is built on, and which the show is also genuinely reluctant to discuss at length. The world we're watching takes place roughly 1,000 years after the end of human civilization. The event that ended it is called the Great Mushroom War. The name is doing a lot of quiet work there. Mushroom because of mushroom clouds, because of nuclear explosions. It's the kind of thing you might hear as a child and think, oh, there was a war and mushrooms were involved somehow. That's a bit odd. And then as an adult, you clock it immediately and feel the penny drop in your stomach. The show never commits to an exact date for when this happened. There are breadcrumbs scattered across episodes and background details, and based on those, most people piece together that it occurred somewhere between the 1980s and the early 2000s. Sigmund Petrichkoff's scrapbook, and we'll get to Simon at length later, he deserves his own section entirely, notes that there's an international conflict brewing between major world powers sometime before the bombs fall. So someone saw it coming, or at least saw the shape of it. What we know for certain, it was a global nuclear conflict, and it ended with the dropping of a very specific bomb. Not an ordinary nuclear warhead, but something mutagenic. Something that didn't just destroy, but rewrote. That bomb is where everything gets strange. The physical aftermath of the Mushroom War is visible throughout the show if you know what to look for. In early episodes, there are ruined skyscrapers in the background, barely noticeable, the kind of thing a child might not register, but an adult clocks straight away. At one point, you can see what appears to be the Eiffel Tower, crumbled and listing in a sea of greenery, the ruins of what were clearly motorways, shopping centres, whole infrastructure systems, reclaimed so thoroughly by nature that they've become part of the landscape. Ooo is our Earth. It just took 1,000 years and a nuclear event to become what we're seeing. The Mushroom War is what turned our world into that world. It wasn't just the blasts that changed things, it was the fallout from this particular weapon, which appears to have interfered with biology at a fundamental level. Animals became sentient, objects developed personalities, candy took on life, the magic that had been, apparently, quietly fading from the world for most of human history, came surging back in the wake of all that mutation. The show's creator has suggested that the bomb essentially ripped the seams between the physical and magical planes of existence, and everything strange that followed is a consequence of that. It's a genuinely interesting piece of world building if you stop and look at it, because it explains so much without ever quite explaining anything. Why are there talking dogs and candy people, and ice wizards? Nuclear magic accident, essentially. The show says this and then keeps going without lingering on it, which is a very specific creative decision. What the show never tells you is who was fighting. There are military vehicles in the ruins. There are signs of mobilization. Conventional warfare clearly happened before the nuclear exchange escalated to its final form. But which nations, which alliances, which specific conflict, nothing confirmed. The show keeps the Mushroom War in the background, specifically because making it too specific would make it too political, too pointed. By keeping it vague, it becomes more universal. It could be any war, it could be every war. There's also the question of what made the mutagenic bomb so singular. The standard nuclear weapons of the Mushroom War clearly existed and did what nuclear weapons do, but the specific bomb that ended it, the one with the green mutagenic properties, seems to have been something else entirely. Something almost supernatural even before magic was involved. When you see it detonate in the alternate farm world timeline, what comes out of it is not just radiation. What comes out of it is the Lich. We'll get to the Lich in a moment. The background details the show hides in its scenery are worth spending a minute on, because they're one of the more deliberate creative choices in the whole series. The animators and the creative team put ruins in those backgrounds on purpose, understanding that most viewers, especially younger ones, would simply not register them, but they're there. Road signs, lamp posts, the stumps of buildings, a Ferris wheel in one episode, lying on its side in a field, half buried. Someone's careful with these details. There's a fan theory, and it's compelling enough to mention here, that the show's setting is not just Earth in general, but specifically North America. That what we're seeing is what the United States and Canada and northern Mexico became after the war. The Ice Kingdom is in the north. The geography, such as it's discernible, seems to match. Simon's scrapbook references him being in various North American locations in the pre-war period. The human settlements that eventually established themselves on the islands are accessible by sea from what would have been the eastern seaboard. If that's correct, and most people who study the show's geography think it probably is, then the Candy Kingdom sits somewhere in the northeastern US. The ruined city, visible behind the tree fort in some shots, would be a recognizable American metropolis. All of Oo's colorful magic is built on the ruins of a specific place we know. One detail that's easy to miss: there's a large hole in the Earth visible from space in later seasons. A piece of the planet that's simply gone. The show implies this might be related to the Catalyst Comet, which we'll also get to, but nobody on screen ever directly confirms whether the Mushroom War's bomb, or the comet, or both together, are responsible. It just exists as a geographical wound, an absence in the shape of the world. And then, perhaps the most quietly devastating detail in the whole show, by the time Finn is growing up in Ooo, nobody really talks about the Mushroom War. Not with dread or grief. It's ancient history. The children of candy and the children of magic grew up in the ruins and turned them into something else, something livable, and the thing that destroyed the world became just the thing that happened before. Which is, when you think about it, very human, in every sense. There is a fan debate about exactly when the Mushroom War happened that's worth briefly noting, because it changes how you read certain details. The show's own timeline is inconsistent in ways that suggest the writers themselves didn't fully commit to a specific date, or committed to multiple dates across different episodes and never reconciled them. Simon's scrapbook and his style of dress suggest the earlier end of that window. The technology visible in the ruins suggests something more recent. Possibly both things are true and the war lasted decades, beginning in one era and ending in another. The show is set in our future. That's the fact the timeline debate is circling. The Mushroom War is something we haven't had yet. The ruins of human civilization belong to people who are alive right now, or to people not yet born. That implication is quietly there in every background detail, in every crumbled building, in every moment when the show looks like a very cheerful documentary about the aftermath of something we are currently in the middle of building toward. Adventure Time never says this directly. It doesn't have to. The Lich is Adventure Time's main villain for most of its run, and he's also the most interesting thing in the show philosophically if you're willing to think about him a bit sideways. On the surface, he's an undead sorcerer who wants to destroy all life. Classic villain motivation, simple, clean, easy to oppose. Finn fights him, the Lich loses, then comes back, and that cycle repeats a few times. Standard stuff, but there's a theory, and this one has a lot of canonical support, that the Lich is not really a villain in the traditional sense at all. He's not making a choice to want what he wants. He is what he wants. He's less a character with motivation and more a force of nature that happens to look like a skeleton. Here's the shape of the argument. The show establishes that catalyst comets are cosmic objects that carry specific intent. When they strike a planet, they release an agent of change. The green catalyst comet, millions of years before the events of the show, struck Earth and killed the dinosaurs. And from that comet, from that extinction event, the Lich emerged. He's not the result of someone being corrupted or a dark wizard going wrong. He is the personification of the comet's purpose. He is mass extinction, given a body and a will and a bottomless desire to finish the job. The show never quite tells you how to feel about the Lich, and I think that's deliberate. He's not a character who benefits from empathy the way most of Adventure Time's antagonists do. You're not meant to understand him in the same way you understand Ice King or Magic Man or even PB at her most controlling. He's meant to be beyond that, something you can't negotiate with, can't reason with, can't rehabilitate. The show has a lot of characters who seem like pure evil and turn out to be damaged people. The Lich is the exception. He's the thing the other damaged people are afraid of. His appearances across the show are worth cataloguing briefly, because each one adds a piece to the understanding of what he is. He's introduced in a tree in the Candy Kingdom, sealed away by magic, broken free. He appears as a skeletal figure with a green flame in his skull and a voice that sounds like every death you've ever been afraid of. Ron Perlman plays him, which is interesting because Tom Kenny also plays the Ice King, and the contrast is striking. The Ice King's voice is pathetic and occasionally sweet. The Lich's voice has no warmth in it anywhere. He's defeated multiple times across the series, and he always comes back, which is the point. You don't defeat entropy, you just delay it. Finn punches him, PB outsmarts him, Jake traps him, the whole gang keeps finding ways to stop him in the short term. But the show makes clear throughout that these are short-term measures. The Lich exists at a level the heroes can't ultimately overcome, only redirect. The well of power beneath the Candy Kingdom is one of the show's more unsettling background details. There's a pool of green liquid in the caverns under the castle that has been there since the early days, since before Bonnibel built the kingdom over it, since the nuclear waste settled in the earth. The pool has the same green colour and quality as the Lich's own magic, as the Lich's energy. The show never explicitly confirms the connection, but places the visual similarity in front of you and lets you work it out. The Candy Kingdom's foundation is, in some sense, continuous with the Lich's essence. The most stable and beloved society in Ooo was built unknowingly on top of its greatest enemy. There's also his line from Mortal Recoil, after possessing Princess Bubblegum. I have destroyed your kind before. He's telling Finn this. He's not claiming to be the bomb or the war. He's claiming a longer history. He's saying he has destroyed humans before, plural, suggesting there were earlier civilizations on Earth that encountered the Lich and did not survive. Whether this is accurate or bluster, whether the Lich has a memory that stretches back to previous cycles of civilization on Earth, is never confirmed. But the line is in the show, sitting there, implying that what happened to the Mushroom War civilization might not have been the first time. His relationship to death is interesting because he's not really against death in the conventional sense. He doesn't seem to enjoy killing or to take pleasure in it. He wants extinction. the end of the pattern of life itself, not any particular instance of it. He's described in various episodes as having no hatred in him, no rage, just a purpose, which is, in its way, more frightening than conventional evil. The Galb connection, the Lich as the last scholar of Galb, changes the reading of his every prior appearance retroactively. He wasn't just trying to destroy life, he was serving something, studying something, operating according to a logic that the show hints at but never fully maps. What does a scholar of Galb learn? What does Galb teach? These questions are left entirely open. He's carrying out the function he was made for, the way a hammer is made to strike things. The show doesn't quite say this out loud, but it sets up all the pieces, and the conclusion is hard to argue with. There's also this. In Whispers, the Lich refers to himself as the Ceaseless Wheel, the last scholar of Galb. That line lands differently depending on how much you know about Galb, which we'll get into properly later on, but the important part for now is last scholar. Not servant or agent, but scholar. Someone who studies, someone who has knowledge, which implies the Lich has an understanding of what Galb is and what it does, and that he considers himself aligned with it, maybe even a disciple of it. Galb, as best anyone can tell, is entropy, or chaos, or the dissolution of all things into incoherence. So the Lich, as Galb's scholar, makes a certain grim sense. If Galb undoes meaning, the Lich undoes life. Different methods, same direction. The mutagenic bomb and the Lich are deeply connected in a way the show only shows you obliquely. In the Farm World alternate timeline, where Finn wishes the Lich had never existed, creating a reality where the mushroom bomb was frozen before detonation. The bomb eventually goes off anyway, and what comes out of it is essentially a new Lich, made from Jake. The bomb and the Lich share an origin. The bomb created him, or released him, or summoned him. The mushroom cloud in the episode looks exactly like the Lich's energy signature. They are, in some sense, the same thing. It's worth thinking about what the show is doing with this, underneath the fantasy framing. The Lich is nuclear annihilation given a face. He's the spirit of the bomb itself, the desire to unmake, the wish for everything to stop. In a show that's ostensibly for children, set in the ruins of a world destroyed by nuclear war, making the ultimate villain a living embodiment of that destruction is a pretty significant creative choice. And then there's Sweet Pea. After the events of Jake the dog, the Lich's physical form is destroyed and he's reborn as a baby, with no memories. Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig adopt him, call him Sweet Pea, raise him with love. He's cheerful and innocent, and has a slightly unsettling look in his eyes occasionally, if you catch it at the wrong moment. There are sequences where he dreams, and his dreams are green and terrible, and you understand that whatever the Lich is, it isn't gone, it's waiting, dormant in a child who doesn't know what he carries. The original series ends without resolving what happens to Sweet Pea, but later epilogue material shows that he survives and grows up. He stays with his parents in the world with the weight of extinction tucked inside him, and that's where we leave him. I find that genuinely more unsettling than the Lich in full form, if I'm honest. The idea that the embodiment of the desire to end all life is somewhere out there in Ooo eating breakfast and playing in fields. Whether the Lich ever wakes up in Sweet Pea is a mystery that the show eventually answers. I want to be upfront about something. Sigmund Petrichkov might be the most genuinely heartbreaking character in animation, not in a way that's designed to devastate you, not with a dramatic score telling you how to feel, but in the quiet, patient way the show reveals his story across multiple seasons, so that each new piece adds weight rather than shock. You meet him as the Ice King, a cartoonish, oddly pathetic villain. He kidnaps Princess Bubblegum occasionally. He seems to have a penguin for a best friend. He's ridiculous in a harmless sort of way, and for the first couple of seasons, that's basically all he is. The Crown's language is interesting. The voices it puts in the wearer's head, according to the tapes, speak in an ancient tongue that Simon can't identify. There's fan speculation that it's Old Norse, which would fit the Scandinavian provenance, but the show doesn't confirm this. What it does confirm is that the voices weren't just noise, they were instructing him towards specific behaviours, telling him to be a king, telling him to find a princess. These weren't random symptoms of damage, they were a program being installed. The VHS tapes themselves are worth lingering on. Simon makes multiple recordings, spread across what appears to be several months or years of decline. In one tape, he's articulate and only slightly changed. In another, his nose is longer, his voice higher, and he keeps losing track of what he was saying. He apologizes on camera for things he clearly can't remember doing. He writes himself notes that he then reads back confused, because by the time he's reading them, he doesn't always know who wrote them. The tapes end before the full transition is complete. Whether Simon kept recording after a certain point and the tapes were lost, or whether he stopped because he no longer understood why someone would make such recordings, is never established. We get the middle of the transformation. We don't get the end of Simon. The tapes are recordings Simon made of himself before the crown took everything. He's an antiquarian, a gentle academic with glasses and a warm voice, and he's talking to the camera because he knows what's happening to him. He knows the crown is changing his mind. He knows he's going to forget. He's making the tapes so that someone, someday, will know what he was. He mentions his fiancée, Betty. He says he hopes she'll come back when he's better. He says he's sorry. He says he was a good person. The Ice King watches this recording and doesn't understand it. He doesn't recognize himself. He laughs, a bit confused, because the man on the tapes seems sad and he doesn't know why. That gap between who Simon was and what he became, and the fact that he was conscious enough for just long enough to document the transition, is one of the great emotional constructions I've encountered in a television show meant for children. What we do know is that somewhere in the post-war ruins, there came a point where Sigmund Petrikov was simply gone, and what was left called itself the Ice King, and had no idea why he needed to find a princess, or why he was so lonely all the time. He kept looking. He never stopped looking. And the thing he was looking for was a specific woman who called him a professor and thought science was the most interesting thing in the world, and he couldn't remember her name. The crown itself was found in Scandinavia, bought from a dockworker, its ancient origin later revealed in the series. Simon put it on to show Betty, and something happened. Something so terrible that Betty left, and he has no memory of what it was. The show briefly shows you this moment, but only in a corrupted home video of Simon putting on the crown. It keeps it deliberately blank, which is the right call. Whatever you imagine is probably worse than whatever they could have drawn. After the Mushroom War, Simon wandered the ruins. The crown was consuming him slowly, his skin turning blue, his hair white, his mind fracturing, but it was also keeping him alive in a world where survival was difficult. He used it when he had to, knowing every use cost him a little more of himself. And then he found Marceline. We'll get to Marceline's full story in the next section, but the key thing here is that she was a small child alone in the ruins when Simon found her. He became something like a father to her, keeping her fed and sheltered and as cheerful as he could manage, occasionally using the crown to protect them both and paying the price in sanity each time. Simon gave Marceline a stuffed toy named Hambo that she kept for 1,000 years. He sang her a song at some point during this period. The song is called Remember You, and later performed by Marceline, who already knows that Ice King is Simon. The lyrics of I Remember You describe Simon's failing memory and his struggle to hold on, but they do not include an apology for forgetting Marceline's name. It's presented in the show as a law delivery mechanism. It works as that. It also just works as a song about dementia, about the specific grief of watching someone you love lose the thread of who they are. Betty's return is one of the show's most emotionally precise moments. She comes through a time portal in the episode, also called Betty, summoned by a magical accident during which Simon is briefly himself again. They have maybe 10 minutes together before the spell breaks. She comes from before the Mushroom War, from a time when they were both just people. She sees what he's become, and then the Ice King comes back, and the window closes, and she stays in the future anyway, because she's not leaving without him. After the finale, when Simon is freed from the crown, the show gives us brief glimpses of who he is without it. He's in the Distant Lands specials and the Fiona and Cake series, older now, living quietly, trying to reconstruct a life that the Ice King spent centuries dismantling. The process isn't clean or triumphant. He cooks popcorn and watches films with Marceline and PB. He goes to a pub and sings I Remember You for an audience, because the song exists in his memory, now that his memory is his own again, and it's easier to sing it than to talk about it. There's a passage in the Fiona and Cake series where Simon's grief is laid out with particular clarity. He's not grieving the lost years exactly. The Ice King's centuries don't feel like his years in the way they might. He's grieving Betty, the specific loss of Betty, and the show handles this carefully. He and Betty have a last conversation, projected through Betty's altered consciousness, in which both of them acknowledge that their relationship had its own problems before the crown, that neither of them was perfect, that they both made choices they could have made differently, and they say goodbye with that honesty intact. It's one of the better written finales to a love story I've seen, partly because it doesn't pretend the love was uncomplicated, even when it was real. The unresolved questions around Simon are fewer than most characters. His story gets more closure than almost anyone else's. But there are still things left open. The crown's actual origin, who made it and why, and whether there was something conscious behind the curse, or whether it was just a thing that happened to exist, and he was unlucky enough to find it. And there's the question of who Simon is now, post-crown. We see him briefly in the Obsidian Special and the Fio Hanu and Cake series, living quietly, trying to rebuild a life without the person he loved most in a world he barely recognizes. That's not really a mystery, so much as a very open emotional wound the show leaves us with. Which feels right, honestly. Some stories don't resolve cleanly, and the show seems to understand that. Marceline. The Vampire Queen is 1,000 years old, give or take, and the show covers maybe a handful of years of that in any detail. The rest is either hinted at, briefly glimpsed in flashbacks, or simply never addressed. She has a whole life, potentially dozens of whole lives, that exist between the scenes we're shown, and the show knows this and uses it. Every so often you get a glimpse of something, a name dropped, a memory surfacing, and you understand that the version of Marceline you're watching is the end result of an enormous amount of history that you're not privy to. Let's start at the beginning, which the show was fairly slow to fill in. Marceline's mother is a human woman named Elise. Her father is Hunsun Abudir, the Lord of Evil, ruler of the Nightosphere, a powerful demon who is also, in his way, a genuinely terrible parent. She was born half human, half demon, which in the show's universe is less mystical hybrid and more means she has some unusual properties and also complicated feelings about her dad. She and her mother travel through the ruins of the post-war world together. Elise eventually falls ill and dies. Marceline is left alone. She's a child at this point, and the ruins of human civilization are her childhood home. This is when she finds Simon, or Simon finds her. They're never quite clear on the order of it. The version of events we get most clearly is in I Remember You, where Marceline's memories of him are intact, even though his memories of her are almost entirely gone. She remembers being kept safe. She remembers the song he made up to cheer her up. She remembers Hambo, the stuffed frog he found for her in the ruins. What she doesn't remember, or at least doesn't show, is the moment Simon left. Because he did leave. The crown took enough of him eventually that he was no longer safe to be around, and she was alone again. He didn't choose to leave. He was taken by the same slow process that had been consuming him since before she was born, but the loss was real, regardless. After that, Marceline's history gets murky in the best way. She becomes a vampire at some point. The Stakes miniseries explores how this happened. She hunted vampires, killed them one by one, absorbing their powers each time until she confronted and defeated the Vampire King himself and became a vampire in the process. It wasn't an accident. She chose to become what she was in order to protect people, though the consequences of that choice followed her for a very long time. She also, at some point, had a relationship with Princess Bubblegum that predates the show's timeline by centuries. We see glimpses. There are clearly feelings there that were complicated and unresolved for a long time. The show confirms they end up together, eventually, but the centuries between are a mystery. What was Marceline doing for 800 years before Finn arrived? Genuinely unclear. She had a house, she played music, she got into arguments and made enemies and had adventures nobody filmed. She's had friends and losses the show never shows us. Whole chapters that existed and mattered and are now just the texture of who she is without specific detail. One thing the show does tell us is the Fry Song incident. It's played partly for comedy, but there's genuine feeling underneath it. Marceline was hungry. Her father ate her fries. It's such a small, petty thing, and it became the pivotal grievance that defined her relationship with Hunsun for centuries. which is one of the most real things Adventure Time has ever depicted. Sometimes it's not the big betrayals that stick. Sometimes it's the small ones, the ones where you realize someone just doesn't actually think about you that much. Hunsen Arbjördir, the Lord of Evil, ruler of an entire dimension of the damned, ate his daughter's fries because he wanted them. And she wrote a song about it, and she was still angry about it 1,000 years later. And honestly, fair. The Stakes miniseries is the show's most sustained attempt to fill in Marceline's history, and it does a reasonable job while still leaving the really interesting parts underdeveloped. We see her hunting vampires across a post-war landscape. The vampires in this telling are not the suave, aristocratic sort of popular mythology. They're creatures mostly, driven by hunger and instinct. Except for the named ones, the Vampire King's Court, who are genuinely dangerous and each carry a specific power. Marceline defeats them one by one. The Fool, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Moon. Each one killed absorbs into her, adding their abilities to hers. She becomes, over time, a composite of everything she fought. And then she finds the Vampire King, who is not entirely what she expected. He's philosophical, even resigned, and their fight is more complicated than the others. She wins. The crown of vampire power settles on her. She didn't want to be a vampire. She was trying to protect people by eliminating the vampire threat, and the mechanism of that protection transformed her into the thing she was fighting. This is a very Adventure Time way of telling that story. The lesson isn't be careful what you wish for exactly. It's more like sometimes the cost of doing the right thing is permanent and structural, and there's no undoing it, and you have to live in the thing you became. The mysteries that remain around Marceline are the gaps, the full shape of her years between Simon and Finn, the full history of whatever she and Princess Bubblegum went through, what being 1,000 years old actually feels like from the inside. There are suggestions, moments where she plays music that seems to reference things the show doesn't elaborate on, references to places and people the audience never sees, that she has a whole life of experience behind her that the show can only gesture at. Her immortality means she'll still be there after everyone she's currently close to is gone. The show doesn't linger on this, neither does Marceline, but it's there as a fact about her existence that the warmth of the present can't entirely obscure. The relationship with Princess Bubblegum is worth dwelling on for a moment, even though, or perhaps because, the show is so reticent about the specifics. There are confirmed centuries of history between them. There was a period where they were close, closer than friends. There was a falling out, serious enough that they spent years not speaking. There was a slow, careful rebuilding. The details of what happened, what was said or done that created the distance, are never given. What the show gives you instead are the residues. The way Marceline has PB's portrait in her house in the Obsidian special. The way PB kept all Marceline's old tapes. The way both of them handle the reunion in the main series with a kind of practiced, careful warmth that suggests they've been here before, tried to be careless with each other before, and learned not to. And then at the very end of the show, they're holding hands, and that's the resolution the show offers. Not a detailed account of what went wrong or how they fixed it, just the fact of them together after everything. Which is probably the right call. Some histories are better held than described. Marceline at the end of the main series is roughly 1,000 years old. By the spin-offs, she's older. She will presumably continue to age beyond any point the show visits, watching worlds change around her, outlasting civilizations the way she outlasted the ruins of our own. There's something almost unbearable about that if you look at it directly, so the show mostly doesn't, and neither does she, and that too feels right. Princess Bubblegum built a civilization from scratch in the ruins of nuclear war. She was a child when she started. She had nothing but time, intelligence, and a radioactive river. That's more or less the actual story of the Candy Kingdom's founding, and it's stranger and darker than the kingdom's candy floss aesthetic would suggest. Here's what happened, as pieced together across multiple episodes. After the Mushroom War, a massive sentient entity made of bubblegum, the Mother Gum, the show calls it, formed somewhere in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. From this entity, two beings emerged, Princess Bubblegum, whose real name is Bonnibel, and her brother Neddy. They grew up in the ruins, near a river that Bonnibel would eventually discover was laced with nuclear waste. Bonnibel was lonely. The Bonnibel Bubblegum episode shows us a young version of her, genuinely warm and full of feeling, desperately wanting a family. So she made one. She created Uncle Gumbold from candy material, and Aunt Lolly, and Cousin Cheekley. She designed them carefully, gave them personalities, planned the specific dynamics she wanted from her family unit. And then Gumbold immediately started scheming to undermine her and build a candy city he could control. Because of course he did. There's something almost funny about this, and also something quietly tragic. She made her family, and her family turned out to be people with their own agendas, which is, when you think about it, exactly what family is like. You don't get to design the personalities after all. Or you do, technically, but you still don't get to control what they do with those personalities. She dealt with Gumbold's rebellion using a potion that reduced him to an infantile state, and then she built the Candy Kingdom anyway, alone over centuries. Over a nuclear river she sealed off and hoped nobody would look at too closely. The Candy Castle sits on top of radioactive waste. That's confirmed in The Vault through the story of Shoko, a thief hired to steal a gem from PB in the early days of the kingdom. Shoko fell into the contaminated river beneath the castle and was mutated catastrophically and died. Her ghost haunted the Candy Kingdom for hundreds of years afterward. PB built her entire civilization over this toxic site, which is, and I say this with genuine appreciation for the show's audacity, a pretty good metaphor for a lot of things. The other aspect of Princess Bubblegum that the show develops slowly over its run is her willingness to make decisions others find troubling. She created the Candy People, hundreds if not thousands of sentient beings, from nothing. They have lives and feelings and fears that she engineered. They don't know this. The Candy Kingdom has surveillance cameras everywhere. PB maintains detailed files on residents and visitors. She has a secret dungeon beneath the castle for beings she's decided are too dangerous to exist freely in the world. She also created Lemongrab. The Earl of Lemongrab is her first attempt to create an heir outside her elemental nature, and he's a catastrophic failure in the specific sense that he clearly suffers. He's in constant psychological distress. He's volatile and confused and unable to regulate himself. He rules his own small kingdom with a specific kind of authoritarian misery that the show eventually has to address directly. PB made him. She knows she made him wrong, and the show doesn't let her entirely off the hook for it. There's a Season 6 plotline where the Candy Kingdom holds an election and PB loses to the King of Ooo, a traveling con man who makes promises nobody with 2 brain cells would believe. The kingdom votes him in by a landslide. The moment works as satire immediately, but the show's more interesting move is to ask why PB lost. The answer it arrives at is roughly, because she's been making decisions for her people instead of with them for 800 years, and even well-intentioned governance conducted without consent eventually generates resentment. She gets her throne back, but the show doesn't pretend the election didn't reveal something. The Bonnibel Bubblegum episode is the one that shows the distance most clearly. Young Bonnibel, small and alone, making a family from nothing, is genuinely warm and open in a way that's almost painful to watch, knowing what she becomes. The episode's implicit argument is that 8 centuries of keeping a fragile civilization alive, of making hard decisions alone, of watching everyone she made outlive their time while she continues, has compressed something in her. She's still in there, but she's much harder to reach than she used to be. The version of PB you see in the early seasons is relatively benevolent. The version you see in the later seasons is more complicated. Someone who has been governing a fragile post-apocalyptic society for 800 years and who has slowly concluded that the only way to keep things stable is to control as much as possible. Whether she's right is something the show debates with itself across multiple episodes without fully resolving, and she's still there, in the spin-offs, doing more or less the same thing. Still building, still managing, still occasionally doing something that makes you think about it for a while afterward. She'll probably outlast everyone else in the show. That's the thing about being made of bubblegum and 800 years of stubborn competence. You endure. Finn the Human is the show's protagonist, the boy with the white hat and the sword and the laugh that sounds like someone falling off a bicycle. He's earnest and brave and sometimes a bit dense in that specific way that comes from genuinely not understanding why people would choose not to be good. He's also a cosmic reincarnation. The show reveals this relatively late in Season 6 in an episode called The Comet. A purple catalyst comet arrives on a course for Earth, and Finn eventually has a conversation with it. The comet tells him in the way cosmic entities in Adventure Time tell you things, which is by being simultaneously profound and slightly confusing, that Finn was once the blue catalyst comet, that he's been cycling through reincarnations on Earth since that comet first struck the planet, starting as a simple butterfly, that he is, in some sense, the material form of the comet's intent. The intent being, as best anyone can tell, heroism, change for the better, the kind of force that pushes a world toward growth rather than extinction. This sits in deliberate opposition to the Lich, who carries the green catalyst comet's intent, the one that killed the dinosaurs in a mass extinction event on Earth. The Lich and Finn are cosmic mirrors. They've presumably been circling each other for millions of years without knowing it, good and extinction taking new forms in each era. When Finn fights the Lich, he's not just a boy fighting a monster, he's a cosmic principle doing what it's always done, which sounds very grand, and the show knows it sounds very grand, so it has Finn mostly just be a kid about it, and not think too hard about the metaphysical implications. His father, Martin Mertens, is worth pausing on because Martin is one of the show's great unresolved characters. He's a con man with obvious charm and zero follow-through on anything that requires sustained caring about another person. He abandoned baby Finn in circumstances that were partly his fault. When Finn finally meets him, Martin has no memory of him. When confronted about the abandonment, Martin says, "No answer I give you will be satisfying," and then leaves again, this time by ascending with the catalyst comet into whatever cosmic form a human being becomes when they are absorbed into a cosmic entity. It's either a profound dodge or a genuinely profound statement, and the show doesn't clarify which. Martin is an interesting case because the show refuses to make him a redeemable villain or a straightforwardly bad one. He's just a person with a self-preservation instinct, so strong it crowds out everything else. He doesn't hate Finn, he doesn't wish him harm, he simply cannot sustain concern for anyone outside himself for longer than a conversation. Martin tells Finn, "You burn enough bridges, the only direction to move is forward." It's the most honest thing he says in the show, and it's still a justification more than an apology. What happened to Martin after that is entirely unknown. He dissolved into the comet and disappeared, and that's the last we see of him. Finn's mother, Minerva, exists as a digital entity on the human islands. Her consciousness uploaded into the island network before she died. She's still there, presumably, in the centuries after the series' end, looking after people in a form that can no longer hold her son or hear him reply. A possible future version of Finn, or rather the next iteration of the Finn cycle, is a being called Shermie, glimpsed at the very end of the finale, centuries after the show's events. He looks like a small cat-like creature. He has a companion who's clearly descended from Jake. He finds the Finn sword and holds it up. The wheel keeps turning. There's a detail about Finn across alternate timelines that the show treats almost as a throwaway, but that sticks with you. In every version of Finn the show ever shows us, in every alternate universe and timeline, he loses his right arm at some point. This happens in the main timeline. His grass sword eventually detaches, taking the arm with it, and it happens in the Farm World timeline, and it's referenced in other alternate versions. The show never quite says why this pattern exists, but the implication seems to be that the loss is part of the cycle somehow. Something about being Finn involves this particular loss. The unresolved questions, whether Finn ever fully understood what he was cosmically, whether the comet has an endpoint, or whether it just keeps cycling, what Martin became, whether the iteration of Finn that existed in the show ever found genuine peace with the scale of what he was carrying. He seemed fine mostly. That's its own kind of answer, really. The show gives Finn a life that's genuinely good despite everything. Friends who love him, adventures worth having, a world worth protecting, and lets that be enough. He's not tormented by his cosmic significance. He's just a kid who likes hitting things with a sword, and happens to be, at a level far below conscious access, the reincarnation of a force of cosmic good. There's something quietly wonderful about that. The universe's designated hero has no idea about the designation. He's just good because he wants to be. Jake the dog is Finn's best friend and adoptive brother. He can stretch. He can grow to enormous sizes or shrink to the size of a marble. He can reshape his body into almost any form. He has children who are half dog, half rainbow unicorn, and he takes this with impressive equanimity. For the first 6 seasons of the show, the explanation for Jake's abilities is essentially He's a magic dog. That's it. His parents, Joshua and Margaret, were adventurers who encountered a shape-shifting creature during one of their cases, and Jake was born with unusual powers as a result. The show mentions this and moves on, and then Season 10 happens, and the episode, Jake the Star Child, reframes everything. A shape-shifting alien named Warren Ampersand arrives and tells Jake that he's his biological father. Not in the way that Joshua is Jake's father is true. Warren explains that he infected Joshua with a parasitic organism, and that organism developed into Jake. Jake was never a magic dog in the normal sense. He's a half-alien, half-dog life form that grew up thinking it was a dog. The implications of this are significant, and the show has about 20 minutes to deal with them, which is not quite enough. Warren claims Jake has a destiny, a grand purpose. He needs Jake to come to the home world. The episode sets this up with a certain amount of weight, and then, because the show was in its final season and clearly running out of room, never follows through. Jake goes with Warren briefly, comes back, and the grand destiny is never specified, never fulfilled, never mentioned again. It's one of the most genuinely unfinished threads in the whole show. What we're left with is the fact of Jake's nature without the meaning of it. He's a half-alien. His entire sense of identity, as a dog, as Finn's brother, as a parent, as the person he is, was built on a foundation he didn't know was there. The show drops this information and then doesn't linger on the existential weight of it, partly because Jake himself seems to process information in a way that doesn't involve sustained existential weight. He takes it in, he makes a note of it, and he continues being Jake. There's also the Prismo connection, which is genuinely strange when you trace it out. Prismo requires a sleeping mortal whose dreams generate Prismo's existence. Through an extremely convoluted series of events involving time travel and a memorial ritual, the person who becomes this eternal dreamer turns out to be a past version of Jake. Jake is, in some sense, the foundation of the multiverse's cosmic infrastructure. An alternate Jake must sleep for eternity at a specific past moment so Prismo exists. This is established and then mostly not examined. It just exists as part of the show's cosmology, the way a lot of things in Adventure Time exist. As a fact that has interesting implications, the show trusts you to sit with. Jake dies at some point between the main series and the events of Together Again, the Distant Lands special set decades later. We don't see how. He ends up in the afterlife. He and Finn eventually reunite there. The show handles his death with the same quality it handles most of its best emotional moments. Quietly, without fanfare, trusting the weight of everything that came before to do the work. Jake's powers are, in retrospect, the biggest hint that something unusual is going on with his biology. The show establishes early on that there are other magical dogs in Ooo. Joshua and Margaret were adventurers who encountered magic regularly, but no other dog does what Jake does. His stretching is categorically different from any established magic system in the show. Jake does cast spells. He doesn't use an external power source. He simply reshapes himself, at will, with a flexibility and range that eventually proves essentially unlimited. He can become as small as a molecule or as large as a skyscraper. He can duplicate internal organs. He can reshape his body into tools, vehicles, weapons, architectural elements. This isn't magic. This is alien biology operating without constraints. His children with Lady Rainicorn are 5 babies, born in an episode where Lady has an unexpected litter. They're half-dog, half-rainbow unicorn, which is already a distinctive combination. But they also each develop unique and immediate personalities. They speak Korean from birth, and they grow to adulthood within the episode at an accelerated rate that the show plays for laughs without really examining. If Jake's biology is alien, what does his children's biology include? The show doesn't address this. The great unanswered questions around Jake. What Warren Ampersand actually wanted? What the grand destiny was? Whether Jake's alien biology means his children inherited something they don't know about. Whether his permanent role as the dreamer of Prismo means any part of Jake still exists in some cosmic sense, sleeping at the center of everything. I'd like to think yes, personally. Though I acknowledge that might be wishful thinking. Garb doesn't appear very often in Adventure Time. When it does appear, the show doesn't explain it. When characters mention it, they do so with the kind of careful circumlocution that suggests they'd rather not think about it too hard. Even the show's creators, in interviews, tend to describe Galb in the vaguest terms possible, which is exactly the right approach for what Galb seems to be. The first time Galb appears is in an episode called Puhoi from 2013. Finn ends up in a pillow world and lives an entire lifetime there. Grows up, has a family, grows old, dies, and when he dies, he floats through space and briefly bounces off the tongue of an enormous four-eyed red creature that tries to eat him. This creature is not named. The moment is almost comedic in how casually surreal it is, but it's there, in the lore, as the first appearance of Galb. Galb is named in the 2015 episode You Forgot Your Floaties, which also reveals what happened to Margles. Margles was Magic Man's wife. Magic Man, also called King Man, also called Normal Man at various points, the show gives its characters different names with some frequency, was once a decent, intelligent Martian who loved his wife and lived a reasonably functional life. Then Galb came and took Margles away. Magic Man tried to build a defense system in her image. The system failed. Margles fell from Olympus Mons, the volcanic mountain on Mars, and the loss broke Magic Man's mind so thoroughly that he became the chaotic, cruel, arbitrary entity the show introduces him as, spending centuries tormenting people in Ooo for no reason apparently, because he'd lost his ability to care about consequences. The fact that Galb can just do this, wander through reality, take a person, leave devastation in its wake, and face no consequences, tells you something about Galb's position in the show's cosmology. It's not accountable to anyone. It doesn't communicate its reasons. It simply is, and things happen in its vicinity, and those things tend to be bad. The Lich's reference to himself as Galb's last scholar is what makes Galb genuinely interesting rather than just an abstract threat. If the Lich studied Galb, then Galb has a nature that can be studied. There are presumably things about it that can be known. And the Lich knowing those things and orienting his entire existence around them is a detail with implications the show doesn't fully develop. In the finale, Betty deliberately summons Galb to Ooo while performing a ritual to save Simon. Galb is enormous. Many of the things it touches dissolve into incoherence, not just destroyed, but fundamentally unmade, reduced to something that isn't even nothing. Characters it contacts are corrupted and fused into monsters. There's a quality to what Galb does that's more disturbing than simple destruction. It removes the meaning from things. It returns complexity to simplicity, organization to chaos, story to noise. The counter to Galb in the finale turns out to be music. Specifically, singing together. The characters who survive the encounter do so partly by singing in harmony, which creates a coherence that Galb's discord can't immediately dissolve. The show has always suggested that music and connection are a kind of response to entropy. Marceline's music, Simon's songs to young Marceline, the emotional underpinning of most of the show's best moments. The finale makes that implicit argument explicit. Shared creative expression is the thing that resists dissolution. Whether that's a metaphysical statement or just a story about the power of connection is a matter of preference, and the show doesn't distinguish between the two. So Betty goes into Galb and becomes something called Gol Betty. She and Simon have a last moment together. He's freed from the crown. She leaves as something that is no longer quite Betty, which is the show's way of saying she didn't survive in any meaningful sense, even if the entity she's now part of persists. Where Gol Betty is now, unknown. What she experiences as a component of Galb, unknown. Whether the Lich, being Galb's scholar, means the Lich has a future function in whatever Galb is doing on a cosmic scale, also unknown. The Margles mystery is perhaps the most poignant unresolved thread attached to Galb. She was just a person. She was taken for reasons the show never provides. Magic Man spent centuries being awful to everyone, partly as a consequence of her absence, and we never find out what happened to her, whether she still exists somewhere inside Galb's incomprehensible interior, whether she was simply unmade. I think about Margles more than I probably should for a character, with about 2 minutes of total screen time. She's the gap underneath the gap, the thing that caused the thing that caused the thing. The ice crown is the most important object in Adventure Time, and the show eventually tells you where it came from. That's not an oversight. The show is very deliberate about what it leaves unspecified, and the crown's origin is one of the most deliberate blanks. You get the start of a provenance. Simon bought it from a dock worker in Scandinavia, sometime before the Mushroom War. The show confirms further information about the crown's provenance, where the dock worker got it, who made it, how old it actually is, what civilization or force produced it, the show eventually reveals in evergreen and related lore. What the crown does is fairly well established. It grants the wearer ice powers and functional immortality at the cost of their sanity and identity. It consumes the person wearing it and replaces them with a distorted Urgent's evergreen archetype, a specific kind of obsessive personality centered on having their deepest wish granted and achieving some form of belonging. Simon went through this over decades, but the transition from Simon to Ice King is essentially the template. Previous wearers presumably went through something similar, because there almost certainly were previous wearers. The crown exists as an object that requires a carrier. It's been functioning somewhere in the world for longer than Simon's lifetime. Where it was before the Scandinavian dock worker, and how it moved through history before that, is a genuinely open question. There's a reading of the crown that makes it less a curse and more a tragic wish fulfillment machine. Simon wanted to be loved by his princess, Betty, who he called his princess. The crown gave him a desire to kidnap princesses, which is both a perverted echo of that original love and a symptom of the person he was becoming. The Ice King built his kidnapping behavior around a need for love he couldn't consciously access, because the crown had erased the specific memory that need was attached to. The Norse-sounding connection is worth a mention because it's one of those details fans infer from the show's runic visuals without the series ever explicitly elaborating on it. Found in Scandinavia, enchantments in an ancient tongue, powers centered on ice and cold, the crown fits into a very specific mythological tradition if you know where to look. In Norse cosmology, ice is one of the primal forces, and there are deep associations between cold, preservation, and magic in that tradition. Whether the show's creators were drawing on this deliberately, or whether it was atmospheric set dressing, the fit is close enough that it's hard to ignore. The voices in the crown, the ones the wearer hears, the ones speaking in the ancient language, are never translated or attributed. We know they instruct towards specific behaviors. We know they're consistent across wearers, because the Ice King archetype is consistent, but whether they represent a consciousness, a program, or something else entirely, is a question the show leaves entirely open. The three wishes embedded in the crown, to be a king, to find a princess, to be normal again, are interesting because that third wish is in there at all. Whoever designed the crown, assuming it was designed, either had a dark sense of humor or encoded genuine compassion into a fundamentally destructive object. The possibility of being normal again, sitting right there in the crown's design, unreachable, presumably, without the kind of cosmic intervention the finale provides, but there. After Simon is freed in the finale, the crown falls at Gunther's feet. Gunther, whom we'll discuss properly in a moment, picks it up and makes a wish. The crown grants it. Gunther becomes the Ice Thing, a new version of the Ice King, and the cycle continues with a new wearer. Whatever the crown is trying to accomplish, it apparently accomplished it with Simon, and is ready to start again. Whether the crown has a will behind it, or is simply an enchanted object running a program it was set running a very long time ago, the show never says. It just keeps going. It finds someone new. It gives them ice and loneliness, and a half-remembered need for love, and the world gets another Ice King, and somewhere in the archives there are probably VHS tapes nobody has found yet. It's one of those objects that feels like it should have a creation myth, a story about who first forged it, and why and what they were hoping for. That story does exist in the show's canon, which means either the show's creators didn't write it, or it existed somewhere in the world of Ooo and nobody thought to look for it, or Simon could have found it if he'd known where to search. He didn't know where to search, of course. He didn't know there was anything to search for. He just thought it was an interesting find from a dock worker in Scandinavia, and he put it on to show his fiancée. And that was that. Peppermint Butler is in almost every episode of Adventure Time. He appears as background, as set dressing, as a minor character delivering information. He's Princess Bubblegum's butler. He wears a little bow tie. He has a small piece of candy with little stick arms. He is also, based on accumulated evidence across 10 seasons, one of the most dangerous beings in the Land of Ooo. Possibly the most dangerous being in the Candy Kingdom. Possibly more dangerous than the Candy Kingdom's ruler, in terms of raw power, though he would never in a million years turn that power against her. The show drips this information out slowly, in small doses, so that you're almost always behind the curve on Peppermint Butler. Each reveal is followed by a return to his normal butler duties, and then another reveal later that's even more alarming, and you're constantly recalibrating how seriously to take this small piece of candy who cares about Princess Bubblegum's schedule. What we know for certain: Peppermint Butler has personal relationships with death, with demons, with entities from dimensions most beings don't interact with. He's been seen performing rituals that would deeply concern most people. He turned children into monster hybrids in one episode, casually, as part of some ongoing arrangement the show never fully explains. He has a nemesis named Peacemaster who dresses like a Puritan and blames Peppermint Butler for corrupting his children toward dark magic, which implies PB has been quietly influencing magic practitioners for a long time. The friendship with Death specifically is one of the show's more interesting, unexplained relationships. Death in Adventure Time is himself a complicated figure, more bureaucrat than cosmic force, managing mortality like a middle manager with a quota. But even so, having Death as a personal acquaintance is unusual. They seem to genuinely like each other. Peppermint Butler has apparently made deals with Death, traded favors, navigated the mechanics of mortality in ways most beings don't have access to. What he's gotten from these arrangements, and what he's given in exchange, the show never specifies. There's also his connection to the demon world more broadly. He can summon demons, communicate with them, make agreements with them. He has what appears to be a working knowledge of infernal politics that would require either extensive study or direct experience. Given how old he apparently is, given that he appears as a small figure in a flashback to the early Candy Kingdom era in the vault, suggesting he's been around since almost the beginning, the direct experience explanation seems more likely. The Distant Lands episode, Wizard City, fills in some of the history. Peppermint Butler, before the events of the main show, was apparently banned from Wizard City after stealing forbidden magic, growing to enormous size, and destroying the town. He started the Great Gum War. The conflict between PB and Ingumbaldia, Peppermint Butler was hit by Gumbald's Dum Dum Juice and regressed to infancy, one of the most feared magicians in the world. And then Gumbald's Dum Dum Juice accidentally hit him in the finale and regressed him to infancy. He lost everything, all the knowledge, all the power, all the history, and the very last shot we get of baby Peppermint Butler in the show's main timeline is him sitting with Princess Bubblegum and Marceline reading a book called Dark Magic 101, with an expression of serene recognition on his tiny face. Because he remembers who he is, even now. By Together Again, decades later, he's fully recovered and back to his old self, which means he lived his entire accumulated history of dark power a second time, off-panel, in the decades the show skips over. He's always been this cycle, he always will be. The mystery that the show doesn't resolve is the depth of his actual knowledge, and the full scope of what he's been up to. His loyalty to Princess Bubblegum is genuine. That much seems consistent across every version of the character. But why? What does she have, or represent, that commands the loyalty of something with his capabilities? He doesn't need her for protection. He doesn't need her for resources. The question of what Peppermint Butler gets from the arrangement is one of those things Adventure Time just leaves sitting there. One reading is that it's simple affection. He loves her in whatever way a dark arts practitioner loves someone, and that's the whole answer. Another reading is that he's been protecting the Candy Kingdom from threats no one else is equipped to handle, working in the shadows, and Princess Bubblegum knows this and has agreed to look the other way. Both readings are supported by what the show gives you. Neither is confirmed. He's also, when you step back, perhaps the show's best example of the gap between appearance and reality. A small candy person in a bow tie. One of the most powerful practitioners of dark magic in Ooo. These two facts coexist in every scene he's in, and most people in the Candy Kingdom have no idea about the second one. There's a thing the show does with the Candy Kingdom that I find genuinely interesting, which is that it presents it as the most functional and stable society in Ooo, while simultaneously leaving all the foundations slightly visible if you look at them from the right angle. We've already talked about the radioactive river under the castle. Let's expand that picture a little. Neddy, PB's brother, is worth a brief mention here because he's one of the show's most quietly. He lives deep beneath the Candy Castle, connected to the kingdom's roots, nourishing the whole thing through a biological process the show briefly explains. Beneath the Candy Key, Neddy barely interacts with others. The kingdom's roots, nourishing the whole thing through some biological process the show doesn't explain. He doesn't speak, he doesn't interact, he's sensitive to the point where any outside contact causes PB, says everyone has their own way of dealing with things, and Neddy's way is to hide and suck on the roots. PB's comment about Neddy is interesting. She says everyone has their way of dealing with things, and Neddy's way is to just keep going deeper. It's a simple line and it lands very differently depending on what you know about her history. Neddy chose the simplest response to the world. Stay underground, stay connected, keep things alive from beneath. Bonnabelle chose the opposite. Build, maintain, control. They came from the same source and became completely different things, which is just an accurate description of siblings, and also maybe a comment on the different ways a person can respond to trauma. The Candy People are PB's creations. She made them individually or in groups over the course of her 800-odd years building the kingdom. They have names and personalities and relationships and fears. The candy corn farmers and the gingerbread citizens and the various pastry-based individuals going about their lives in the kingdom have no idea they were designed. They experience their lives as real, which they are, while PB experiences them as, well, not property exactly. The detail about fear of the ocean is mentioned in an early episode of Adventure Time and not revisited. He made them to be afraid of the dark, specifically. This is mentioned in an early episode and then not revisited, but it's a detail that sticks. She engineered fear into the Candy People as a control mechanism, presumably because fear of darkness keeps populations close to home and compliant. I find that one difficult to set aside, honestly. It's not that she hurt them, they live full lives, they seem fine, but she reached into the architecture of their psychology and placed a fear there because it was convenient for her, and they have no idea. The surveillance apparatus is significant in the later seasons. PB has cameras throughout the Candy Kingdom, security systems, detailed files. She's monitoring her people. The justification she offers, when pushed, is that Ooo is genuinely dangerous, and she needs to be able to respond to threats quickly. This is true. It's also the justification authoritarian governments tend to offer, and the show seems aware of both things simultaneously. The dungeon is perhaps the most uncomfortable element. Beneath the Candy Castle, accessible only to PB and a few trusted individuals, she maintains a prison. The creatures held there are, by PB's assessment, too dangerous to roam free. The show visits this dungeon occasionally, without giving us a full accounting of who or what is down there, how long they've been imprisoned, or by what standard PB makes these determinations. Lemongrab is the sharpest edge of the kingdom's dark side, and we touched on him in the PB section, but he deserves a moment here. He's not a villain in the traditional sense, he's a person in genuine distress, created with fundamental flaws in his psychology, ruling a small domain in a state of constant, barely contained panic. The show eventually gives him a counterpart, another Lemongrab, and for a while they seem to help each other. And then one of them eats the other, and the remaining Lemongrab is perhaps more damaged than before. PB had to reset him eventually, turn him back to a more stable state. But the question of responsibility for a being she made wrong is one the show raises and doesn't fully answer. The Candy Kingdom works, mostly. The Candy People are generally happy, mostly. The infrastructure is functional, the kingdom is defended, the science is remarkable, but underneath all of it is nuclear waste, and the castle is a prison, and the citizens were designed, and the ruler has been governing alone for 8 centuries, with increasingly flexible ethics. These are facts that coexist with the cotton candy aesthetic, and the show holds all of them together without resolving the tension between them, which, if you think about it, is more realistic than most fictional governments get credit for. One of the show's longest-running questions is simple. Where did all the humans go? Finn is described in the early seasons as the last human in Ooo. It becomes part of his identity, this lonely distinction, this tiny population of one that makes him specific and strange among all the Candy People and magical beings around him. There's a quiet melancholy to it that the show doesn't draw attention to. Because Adventure Time is good at melancholy, it doesn't call attention to. The answer comes in the Season 8 miniseries Islands, and it's one of the show's more satisfying pieces of resolution, though it generates its own set of new questions. After the Mushroom War, a group of surviving humans decided that Ooo was no longer survivable. Vampires, oozers, the various mutations and magics that had transformed the world. A comet. They gathered what they could, boarded a container ship, and sailed away from the mainland. They eventually settled on a chain of islands far enough from Ooo to be beyond its worst dangers. They lived there in isolation for approximately 1,000 years. They developed their own culture, their own technology, their own rules about when and how people could come and go. The rules were strict. Their isolation was almost total. The islands became their whole world. The island society the show depicts is not presented as obviously wrong, which is one of its more interesting choices. Yes, the isolation is total and enforced by systems the islanders mostly can't see. But the people there are safe, educated, and materially cared for in a way that virtually nobody in Ooo is. The trade-off is genuine, and the show doesn't pretend otherwise. Freedom and safety are in real tension, and Minerva, who becomes the system that enforces the island's boundaries, even after her human death, genuinely believes she's making the right call. Whether she is remains an open question. Finn's mother, Minerva, was a healer on Hub Island, one of the main settlements. She met Martin Mertens there. They had Finn. Martin's history of con artistry and bad decisions caught up with him, and the family had to flee in circumstances that ended with baby Finn being lost to the mainland. Finn washed up on the shores of Ooo and was found by Joshu and Margaret, the adventuring dogs, and raised as their own. Minerva eventually died of an illness, but before she died, she uploaded her consciousness into the island's computer network. She's technically still there, a digital ghost running the care infrastructure of Hub Island, watching over the human survivors in a form that can no longer hold her son or hear him reply. When Finn finds the islands in the show, he and Minerva have a reunion conducted through screens, which manages to be emotionally weighty despite, or maybe because of, the technological mediation. Dr. Gross is introduced in the same mini-series and is one of the show's more interesting loose threads. She's a human scientist who escaped the island's isolation and has been augmenting herself and others with animal DNA, creating human plus beings, experimenting with the boundaries of what human bodies can become. She's clearly not benevolent, or at least not in any conventional sense. When we leave her at the end of the island's arc, she's still out in the wider world, doing unclear things. The show never picks this up again, which is a shame because the question of what a post-war human choosing to become something else entirely looks like, philosophically and practically, is exactly the kind of thread Adventure Time is good at when it follows through. What happens to the human islands after the events of Islands is also unresolved. The isolation that defined them has been breached. Finn's visit, the secrets he's learned, the existence of contact with the outside world, whether the islands eventually integrate with Oo's broader civilization, or whether they retreated back into isolation, the show doesn't say. The question of what it means for Finn to know he's not the last human, to discover there's a whole community of people like him who he'll never quite belong to, because he grew up in Ooo with a magic dog and his mother is a computer now, is handled with the show's characteristic light touch. He processes it, feels things, and continues. He was always good at continuing. Prismo is a wishmaster who lives in a yellow cube floating outside of time. He grants wishes that come with unintended consequences, not as a trick, but as a structural reality of how wishes interact with complex systems. He watches other timelines on a wall of screens. He keeps a jar of artisanal pickles he's very proud of. He is, according to the show's canon, one of the most powerful beings in the multiverse. He is also a dream. This is established in Wake Up and confirmed gradually. Prismo's existence is generated by the dream of an old man who lies sleeping in a room at the center of the time room. When the old man wakes up, Prismo ceases to exist. When the Lich figures this out and wakes the old man and then destroys him to ensure he can never sleep again, Prismo is killed. He simply stops. Bringing him back involves an extremely recursive piece of time travel that I'll try to describe without making your eyes slide closed from the complexity. Through a series of events involving Finn and Jake performing a memorial ritual for Prismo, a past version of Jake is directed to become the sleeping old man who dreams Prismo into existence. This version of Jake must sleep for eternity in the time room so that Prismo can persist. It's a sacrifice made by a version of Jake who existed briefly and volunteered for infinite sleep to save a friend. That version of Jake is presumably still there, sleeping at the center of the multiverse, dreaming. The time room itself is described as the quasi-corporeal dwelling place of Prismo, existing outside of time and producing time waves that are experienced by other dimensions. It's where the cosmic beings of the Adventure Time universe occasionally meet. The cosmic owl, who appears in significant dreams as an omen, Death, who manages mortality in the show's universe, various other entities. The cosmic owl deserves a brief tangent because it's one of the show's more understated pieces of cosmology. It appears in dreams as a sign that the dream is significant, prophetic, consequential. Characters who see the cosmic owl in their sleep are meant to pay attention because what they're dreaming is going to matter. The show doesn't explain what the cosmic owl actually is beyond this function, whether it's a being with its own consciousness and motivations, or simply a signal mechanism in the universe's dream infrastructure. It seems to know things. It seems to be present at important junctures. Whether it has opinions about those junctures is never established. The wish mechanics of the time room are worth understanding, because they explain a lot about why the show's solutions to problems tend to be complicated. Prismo grants wishes, but wishes in this universe have a structural property. They can't directly contradict existing reality, they can only redirect it. When Finn wishes the Lich never existed, the universe creates an alternate timeline where that's true, rather than unmake the Lich from the existing one. When the Lich wishes for the extinction of all life, the universe routes that wish through the multiverse in a way that affects the time room rather than Ooo directly. Wishes aren't commands. They're arguments with physics, and physics usually finds a way to be technically compliant while doing something unexpected. The multiverse structure the show establishes is layered and only partly explained. There are infinite dimensions, some permanently linked, others connected temporarily. Prismo can observe any timeline from the time room. Wishes can create new universes, as Prismo himself did when he built the Fio-Hanu and Cake universe more or less as a personal creative project. The Fio-Hanu and Cake universe is worth discussing here because it's one of the more surprising pieces of lore that emerged in the later material. Prismo made a universe, without authorization from whatever cosmic authority governs such things, that mirrored Ooo almost exactly, except everyone was gender-swapped. He hid this universe inside Ice King's fractured mind, because the Ice King's empty, damaged mental space was essentially unused real estate from a cosmic perspective. When Simon is cured and stops being the Ice King, the magic drains from Prismo's hidden universe. It becomes mundane. Everyone in it loses their identities and starts living something closer to ordinary life. Fiona is a 29-year-old struggling to keep a job in a world that has no magic. Cake is a normal cat who occasionally seems to remember being something more. The spin-off series deals with Prismo eventually getting permission for his rogue universe by having Fio-Hanu transfer ownership of it to its inhabitants, making it canonical through the consent of the people who live in it, which is a nice idea, philosophically, whatever its actual metaphysical mechanics. The time room and the multiverse remain one of the show's most interesting constructions because they imply a cosmic infrastructure that almost nobody in Ooo knows exists. The characters live in one small dimension of an infinite system. The decisions being made at a level above them, by Prismo, by the Cosmic Owl, by Golb, by whatever sits above Golb, shape their lives in ways they never see, which is either just the structure of the Adventure Time cosmology or a comment on something more general about existence, depending on how much you want to read into it at this hour. The parties at the time room are a fun detail that the show uses sparingly but consistently. Prismo hosts these gatherings where cosmic entities come to hang out. Death, the Cosmic Owl, Party God, various others. They play cards, they chat. The implication is that the beings who manage the universe's various functions are, when they're off duty, just people who know each other through work and occasionally get together. This is one of Adventure Time's more unusual choices, humanizing the cosmic. The entities who manage time and mortality and dreams are not remote and imperious. They have friends, they have preferences. Prismo really does care about his pickles. Death has a complicated romantic life. The Cosmic Owl presumably has opinions about the dreams it chooses to appear in. Making these beings small in this specific way, not powerless but relatable, changes the texture of the cosmology significantly. The universe is managed by beings with personalities, which means it's managed in a way that has all the arbitrariness and warmth and occasional incompetence that personalities involve. Whether that's comforting or alarming probably depends on how you're feeling about things in general. Gunter is the Ice King's pet penguin. He waddles around the Ice King. Some characters have worried about Gunter, decisions, getting into minor mischief, waddling back. He's been in the background since the first season. Nobody has ever worried about Gunter. This was a mistake, as it turned out. The episode Orgolorg reveals that Gunter is actually the compressed, diminished form of an ancient cosmic entity called Orgolorg. Before being reduced to penguin form, Orgolorg was powerful enough to threaten entire cosmic systems. The entity was defeated by a cosmic being and compressed, his consciousness and power packed into the body of a small penguin, left to wander the earth in a state of effective imprisonment. This happened long enough ago that the Orgolorg inside Gunter has essentially forgotten what it was. The cosmic predator that once rivaled gods has been functionally a penguin for so long that penguin is what it is. It makes small mischief, it waddles, it has feelings about the Ice King that are probably as close to genuine attachment as something like Orgolorg can manage. The show's choice to not give us Orgolorg's history is an interesting one. We don't know which cosmic being compressed it, or why, or what exactly it was doing that warranted punishment by compression into penguin. We don't know what civilizations or systems it threatened, or what cosmic framework adjudicates when an entity becomes dangerous enough to neutralize. While plenty of people in the show worry about penguins, it was stopped, and the form of its imprisonment was specifically designed to make it harmless. Small, cute, nobody worries about penguins. There's an almost funny quality to the reveal that the Ice Kingdom's penguin mascot is an ancient cosmic predator who simply forgot what it was. Gunter waddled around the Ice Kingdom for hundreds of years, making nuisances of itself and stealing things, and sometimes showing flashes of something strange, and nobody connected it to anything significant because it was just a penguin. In Orgolorg, Gunter's true nature begins resurfacing when a catalyst comet approaches Earth. Orgolorg's original purpose was to absorb the power of a catalyst comet, and the cosmic memory of that purpose starts activating. Gunter grows, transforms, becomes something monstrous and alien, goes to space, and is defeated by Finn before absorbing the comet, and then he reverts to Gunter, the penguin, the way he always does. The finale is where Orgolorg's arc reaches its quietly beautiful conclusion. The ice crown is available. Gunter can pick it up. As Orgolorg, as Gunter wishes to be like the Ice King, .smic systems, Gunter could presumably Gunter wishes to be like Ice King.n from it. Gunter wishes to be like Simon, not to be a king, not to be powerful, to be like the gentle, sad, kind man who kept Gunter as a pet. The ancient evil that spent centuries watching Sigmund Petrikov at close range, going gradually mad from the crown's influence, decided that what it wanted most was to be what he was. Kind, principled, loving in a quiet and slightly chaotic way. The crown gives Gunter what he wished for and turns him into the Ice Thing, a new version of the Ice King, which is its own kind of cycle, but the wish itself is the thing. That's the story of Orgolorg's arc. An ancient cosmic predator, compressed and forgotten, looks at a human man losing himself to a curse and decides that what that man was is the best thing it has ever seen. What the Ice Thing is doing now in Ooo, what kind of adventures or miseries await Gunter in the show, does not specify Orgolorg's full history, but it does state that it was imprisoned for ruling the solar system as a breaker of worlds and trying to seize the catalyst comet's power. What it was before the compression and why exactly it was considered dangerous enough to imprison in a penguin body for eternity is unclear. The show introduced enough of it to be genuinely intriguing and then moved on to the finale. That's adventure time sometimes. The show tells us, obliquely and in pieces, what happens to the Land of Ooo after the Egrables 1000 Pluten, an episode from Season 6, takes place approximately 1,000 years after the show's main timeline. The Shape of Things. Grables 1000 Plusa, an episode from Season 7, takes place approximately 1,000 years after the show's main timeline. An alien named Cuba is navigating across a ruined Earth, using Grables, story containers, to understand the history of the world he's traveling through. The Ooo he moves through is devastated. The Candy Kingdom is rubble. The Ice King in a monstrous transformed state that looks nothing like Simon and nothing like the cartoonish Villy. The specific catastrophe is called the Great Mushroom War. Distance. The world has, at some point in the intervening centuries, gone through something terrible. What that something was, not specified. The show drops you into this bleak future without explanation. The gap between the main series end and what Cuba sees is a complete blank. Another catastrophe? A slow decline? Something specific and terrible? Unknown. The show leaves you to understand only that the version of Ooo, Finn and Jake knew didn't last forever, and that's a more honest statement about the world than most fictional universes are willing to make. Cuba himself is an interesting background detail the show never develops. He appears in several episodes across the show, usually as a framing device for anthology stories. The way archaeologists study ancient cultures. He appears in several episodes across the show, always as a framing device for anthology stories. Whether he appears after Galb, after another war, you may remember Lemonhope from the episode of the same name, a gifted musician who was freed from Lemongrab's castle and wandered Ooo having adventures, and eventually returned to fulfill a promise to free the people he left behind. Lemongrab's castle and wandered Ooo for years having adventures, and eventually returned to fulfill a promise to free the people he left behind. The show in that episode shows a flash forward of old Lemonhope returning to the ruins of Ooo, climbing the rubble of Castle Lemongrab, and sleeping peacefully in his old bedroom. Grable's 1000 Plus shows that flash forward in the present tense, Lemonhope comes back exactly as foretold, and sleeps in his room while everything around him is ruins. It's the only moment in that bleak future episode that feels warm. The rest of the world ended, but Lemonhope gets his room and his rest, as promised. The finale offers a different glimpse of the far future, one less bleak. Centuries after the events of the show, in what appears to be a period after whatever destroyed the Grable's era Ooo, and then allowed things to rebuild again, we see Shermie and Beth. Shermie is a cat-like creature, cheerful and small, who finds the Finn sword and holds it up. Beth is a shape-shifting dog, clearly descended from Jake. They're heading off on adventures. The reincarnation cycle continues. A new Finn and a new Jake, in new forms, in a changed world. Everything that happened, the Mushroom War, the 1,000 Years of Ooo, the Lich and Golb, and Simon and Marceline and all of it, becomes the deep history of a world that is now, again, young enough to have heroes with swords going on adventures. The Finn sword is an interesting object to pass down. It's not just a sword, it's a sword containing an echo of Finn, a version of Finn, from a timeline that was absorbed into the blade. So when Shermie picks it up, there's a sense in which a piece of Finn is there, handed down across the centuries. The cycle isn't just cosmically similar. There's a thread of direct continuity in the object itself. A small piece of Finn gets to meet the next Finn. What we don't see is what the world between these moments looked like. The long middle, the centuries between Finn's time and Shermie's time, with whatever catastrophes and recoveries and quiet periods and new civilizations came and went. The show gives us the beginning and the far future end, and the middle is a vast silence. The world continued, that's all we know. There's something genuinely consoling in that, if you sit with it. The show doesn't promise that anything lasts, or that tragedy is avoidable, or that the people you love won't eventually be gone, but it does seem to suggest that the thing that Finn embodied, the impulse toward heroism, toward goodness, toward doing the right thing because it's the right thing, keeps coming back. The Blue Catalyst comet keeps finding new forms. The world keeps finding new ways to put a hero with a sword in it. This is the section where I tell you that Abraham Lincoln is the King of Mars in the Adventure Time universe, and that this is completely canonical and treated without irony. The Martians are what happened to humans who survived the Mushroom War and made it off-planet. Over hundreds of years of living on Mars, the survivors mutated into a new race of highly intelligent beings with advanced magical capabilities. Abraham Lincoln, for reasons the show doesn't really explain, is one of their leaders. Not a metaphorical Lincoln, but an actual Lincoln, or something that is functionally Lincoln, reigning over a civilization of post-human Martian wizards. I want to be clear that this is information the show just deposits in you, casually, without making a big deal of it. Magic Man is the Martian who gets the most attention. His full arc is one of the more complete character journeys in the show, though it mostly happens in the background. Before everything went wrong, he was a decent person. Thoughtful, powerful, genuinely caring about his wife Margles and his place in the Martian community. Then Galb took Margles. We talked about Galb's nature in its own section, but the effect on Magic Man deserves specific attention. Losing Margles and failing to build an adequate defense system in her image, and watching that system fail, broke something in him that centuries couldn't repair. He came to Ooo. He spent what appears to be a very long time being arbitrary and cruel to everyone he met, tormenting people in petty ways, inflicting suffering without apparent odd. He does have a goal. He does have an agenda. Pacific cruelties the show shows us from Magic Man are worth noting because they're so petty. He doesn't have a goal. He doesn't have an agenda. He turns people into turkeys. He swaps consciousness between bodies for no reason. He sets up small, mean pranks that inconvenience and distress people with no benefit to himself. He's not doing evil things because he wants anything. He's doing them because he's stopped caring about whether things are good or bad, and the default of someone with tremendous power who stops caring about consequences is cruelty. This is the show's diagnosis of what unprocessed grief does at sufficient scale and duration. It turns the person you were into something that hurts things, not because they want to, necessarily, but because pain without outlet becomes damage, and damage spreads. Abraham Lincoln is one of their leaders. Not a metaphorical Lincoln, but an actual Lincoln, or something that is functionally Lincoln, reigning over a civilization of post-human Martian wizards. Lincoln appears in one episode, grants a wish as the King of Mars, and is never mentioned again. The show clearly found this funny and didn't feel the need to elaborate. The other Martian of note is Grobgob-Globgrod, a four-faced deity who sacrifices himself to redirect what he believes is the Catalyst comet away from Mars. He launches himself into space, flies at the comet, changes its trajectory. It turns out the object wasn't the Catalyst comet at all. It was Martin Mertens in a spaceship. Grobgob-Globgrod died to redirect a deadbeat dad's spacecraft. This is both funny and grim in equal measure, which is a very Adventure Time combination. Magic Man eventually resolves. Partially. He becomes normal man. He moves towards something like healing, though the show is realistic about the limits of that healing given the scale of what he lost. He'll never have Margles back. The Martian king, who used to be a decent person, who used to be a cruel wanderer, is now just a quiet man trying to do better. Which is maybe the most the Martian civilization is a functioning society on Mars. Made up of magical aliens using alien magic is shown only briefly. A functioning society on a different planet, descended from humans, using magic that feels alien even by Ooo standards. Their relationship to the events on Earth is distant and mostly uninterested. They watch. They occasionally intervene when cosmic objects threaten their planet. They have their own history and concerns. Whether they survived whatever destroyed the future Ooo that Cuba navigates through, whether Martian civilization persisted beyond the events of the show doesn't address any of this. Mars just exists, as far as we're told, floating up there in its own particular strangeness, carrying on. There's something I keep coming back to with Adventure Time, and it's this. The show was deeply, genuinely committed to the idea that leaving things unresolved is sometimes the most honest creative choice. Not every thread gets picked up. Not every mystery has an answer that the writers bothered to find. Some of that is abandoned storylines and cancelled spin-offs, and the practical limitations of making a television show. But some of it feels intentional, a decision that the world of Ooo should feel larger than the show can contain, that there should always be more around the corner than the camera shows you. Warren Ampersand's plans for Jake? Dr. Gross, out in the world somewhere, doing unknown things to unknown people. What Betty experiences inside Galb. If she experiences anything. What Martin Mertens became when the comet absorbed him. Whether there's a consciousness in there that still remembers being Finn's father. Where the ice crown came from before the Scandinavian dockworker had it. What actually happened in the 1,000-year gap between the Mushroom War and Finn's time that the show never quite fills in. And there are smaller things too. The ones that don't make lists, but that stick with you. What happened to Choose Goose, the strange rhyming vendor who disappeared after the early seasons? Whether the Lich inside Sweet Pea ever resurfaces. What it's actually like to be Flame Princess, ruling a fire kingdom underground with all that power and all that complicated history with Finn. The show touches these characters, drops a hint of depth into them, and moves on. They just exist in the world, having lives we don't see. These questions are going to stay open. Most of them, probably all of them. The show ended in 2018, and the spin-offs, as rich as some of them are, haven't closed these particular doors. And I find I'm okay with that, more than I expected to be. There's a version of media engagement that's about completion, about knowing everything, having everything explained. Adventure Time isn't really designed for that mode. It's designed for wondering, for sitting with the shape of things without requiring them to resolve. The Land of Ooo is a world that ended, rebuilt itself, and kept going. The people in it are carrying losses that stretch across centuries. The threats they face are sometimes comprehensible and sometimes genuinely cosmic and incomprehensible. And through all of it, the show says something simple. It's worth continuing. The cycle is worth continuing. Finn grew up, Jake loved him, Simon eventually remembered who he was. Marceline played music for 1,000 years and will probably play it for 1,000 more. PB built something that lasted longer than she expected, even if it didn't last forever. The wheel turned, and somewhere in the far future, a small creature found a sword and held it up, and the whole thing started again with fresh eyes. That feels like a